Now we're going to discuss our familiar old friend, the Bugera 333XL. So far, it's been behaving since the transformer repair. I haven't had any more problems with it, although it has been losing volume lately, which I think is just because the tubes are really worn out. Must confess, I'm really abusive on this thing. Specs, for those of you that don't already know or that haven't seen my previous vids on it, the Bugera 333XL is a 120 watt all-tube 3-channel head. The controls are as follows. You have 2 inputs right here instead of 1 like my crate. You have the low gain input, which is for your active pickup guitars and guitars with high output humbuckers, so you don't end up clipping the clean section. I actually kind of like clipping the clean section a little bit and overdriving it, so oftentimes I just use this one. The other one up here, which is my very much broken jack, is the high gain input. It still works, but this part broke off because at the factory they improperly torqued the nut that went on here and it broke off. And since I don't have enough time to get it fixed before I have to go do something else with my band, I can't send it into warranty repair, so I'm just, leaving it as is. I may eventually fix it myself someday, since I've already done enough repairs to this amp by myself and done a very good job of it, I must say. You have channel selection switch. This one does the clean channel. On the clean channel you have bass, mid-range, treble, and volume. And on all these channels on the Bugera 333XL, the EQ is an active EQ. That means the default for these knobs is straight up. And I know you can't see it on camera, but I have them all straight up on my channel for the most part. And instead you use it as a cut or a boost. So you either roll it back and it cuts out that particular frequency, or you turn it up and it boosts it. As opposed to a regular amp where all the way up is the maximum they'll output of that, and all the way down tends to cut out your sound. Clean channel is very basic. Both distortion channels, you got 2 of them. You have one called Crunch, which gives you sort of a classic Marshall kind of sound, sort of like a plexi. And then you have the top part, which is lead, which is more of a Mesa-ish type channel sound-wise, but it sounds more like a really gainy Marshall to my ears. On these channels, they all have the same controls. You have the volume control, which controls the overall level, treble, mid-range, and bass, your active EQ, basically, and gain, which controls your output level. And then you have this crunch. Then you have the selection switch for each channel, and each channel has its own XL switch, which gives it a lower mid-range boost. I use those sometimes when I need a boost, especially when my tubes are getting near the end of their lives. I use it to eke a little more extra life out of the tubes. It tends to make them sound like when I have it off, although I always have the XL on the lead channel because I use it to really soup up those gainy guitars. Crunch channel is usually what I use most of the time on the Bugera. My primary distortion tone, like I get on my V-amp, I get a very similar sound on this, except it's a bit more organic and tube. Up here on the lead channel, I use this for boosting my single coil equipped guitars, my Telecaster, my Mustang, the guitars that don't have enough oomph to get that gain going, so I use the lead channel to punch it up a bit. Then you have a noise gate here, and I always have that pegged out to max. It's supposed to be non-destructive, but it really doesn't do much anything at all. It only works on the lead channel, and second off, it only sucks out certain frequencies, so you still got a bit of in the background when that channel's on and the amp's cranked, which for me is almost all the time. Over here I've got a reverb switch and an effects loop boost switch. These both serve the same functions that they would on a foot switch, except for the 333XL does not have a foot switch for the reverb. You have your reverb level right here. The Bugera 333, also unlike my crate, does not have a spring reverb. It has a digital reverb mounted on a little expansion card type dealie inside the amplifier. It gives it a very different sound. It's sort of similar to the room reverb on my Behringer V-amp that's over there that I'm talking through right now. Looking over here, we've got your presence knob, which accentuates the level of brightness. This is usually almost always straight up. I find if I turn it too high, it sounds too trebly for my sound. If I turn it too far back, it sounds too dark and not up and out enough. And there's your master volume, which is just basically controls the overall output volume level. This, if you want maximum volume to be available to you, then you just set this bugger all the way up to 10 over here, and then use these controls to control your volume. I usually have it set about halfway, because I find when I have it all the way up, it gets a little out of control and a little noisy sometimes in live situations. And an earmark of all tube amps is these two switches here. Instead of just one power switch, when you have a tube amp, you have a standby switch. All power does is applies power to the tubes and powers up the circuitry inside the amplifier. But this enables the speaker. When you flip on your power, you wait a while for the tube's filaments to heat up, and then you hit the standby switch. And when the standby switch is on, what it does is it powers everything. It gives power to the speaker, so then you can actually hear the amplifier. And then when you shut the amp off, and this is one of my gripes about the 333 I'll show you later, is that when you shut off standby, you wait for this light to go out before you shut off this one, or otherwise speaker damage can possibly occur, and you also have this awful type noise that you get. Well, not really that gross, but it's a noise no less. All this trim up here is chromed plastic. Some people like to remove it. Personally, that's one of the things I actually like about the Bugera stylistically. It has a very kind of unique look to it, given the plastic. Now let's look at the back controls. This is going to be a two-parter because there's a lot of stuff to go over on this amp. It's very, very much more complex than that crate. Now we're looking at the back of the amplifier. All the way over here you have an effects loop. This is a foot switchable effects loop. I actually don't use it as such. It actually has a double purpose. The effects loop acts as both an effects loop and as a volume booster in my case. Since I keep my volume down relatively low, what I do is I crank these up just enough to give me about 3 marks on the mixer higher for solo boosts. And when I'm playing solos, I can cut through the band and not have to worry about the sound engineer pumping my volume up. Some of those guys really mess up, or when they don't know when your solo is coming because they don't know your band or haven't seen them before. This allows me to get around that problem. And this allows them to actually enjoy the music a little more because they don't have to worry about when they got to pump up my solo. The foot switch jack right here is an interesting dealie. It's like an IBM PS2 keyboard jack, actually, except it's got a different pin out. Specialized to the Bugera amps. You can't use any other kind of foot switch with it. The foot switches for both Bugera amps are identical. They just have different labels, and one doesn't have an LED, and I'll talk more about that later. This also has switchable impedance for your cabinets. It can support a 4 ohm, 8 ohm, or 16 ohm cabinet. The default Bugera cabinet is 16 ohms. Most cabinets, like the Mesa Boogie Stiletto cab that I have at my practice space, is 8 ohms, and 4 ohms is things like a Fender cabinet or something. Since I'm going to be recording this through my Bugera cab, it's 16 ohms it is. And these are your loudspeaker inputs right here. You can run it. You have to have one plugged in, or otherwise damage to your input or output transformers could happen from it, because they'll be straining to send the sound somewhere and there'll be no output to it. Over here is your line out. This is used in recording applications, usually with a cabinet sim. I've actually used this before with the V-amp over there to emulate the cabinet while I'm playing really quietly in my apartment when I do videos at night. I'm probably going to microphone this a little bit too, and microphone this and maybe even run the line out too, so you know what it sounds like in both ways. And then you got all the stickers and all that standard stuff. Of course, mine's made in China, the electronics builder of the world. And then we've got your fuse, of course, for when your mains voltage spikes. And then over here you have your plug-in for your cable. It actually has a removable cable. And then talking about the rest of the amp, you got a transformer here, 4 EL34 tubes right up here, swappable with 636 L6s, and your output transformer. And they give you these handy dandy gadgets back here for other stuff.